you know, some of the obstacles I mentioned were, you know, the lack of really adequate rehab services and the wait for those services that are available. You know, poverty. Half of the homeless are people with disabilities. But it's also that even those patchwork services that are available are so dispersed between different agencies and different organizations or different government agencies that it becomes really impossible to connect all the pieces of the help you need to put it together to be a full picture. Matter of fact, about 100% of the disability community feels it's impossible to connect all the different patchwork programs that are supposed to fit together to make a whole, you know, quilt of support for you. It's impossible. You can't do it, and so that's a really you know, that's a really huge obstacle, and that's something that really does have to be seriously, and that's not easily solved. You know, there's you know, we talked about the public awareness and the attitudes. You know, a lot of times the attitudes, really public attitudes, really diminish or deny the severity or the real challenges of people with disabilities, and particularly the cognitive disabilities. I mean, just it's. I would say that the attitude, the attitude, the prejudice about the disability, the ignorance about the disability, actually becomes a second disability. It really is it's as powerful, you know, an impediment as the disability itself. And that's saying a lot. You know, that's saying a lot. And it's the other, you know, another thing is in terms of employment. You know, there's the idea that people with disabilities, you know, should be accommodated to help us get back into the traditional workforce. But I've also argued that there are a lot of people with certain types of disabilities, cognitive and other disabilities, that there needs to be a way to allow us to become productive in a non-traditional workforce setting. Because it's trying to get all the accommodations and the transportation, everything needed to try to get into the traditional workforce is just too great. Or, for example, with you know, people with brain injury, for example, you don't really know where your energy level, your capabilities are going to be on any one given day, whether you're going to be able to deal with it or not. And think about it. Think about asking an employer to accommodate you with that type of, you know, variability in terms of your capability of performing. That, you know, that's asking a lot of an employer or a system to, you know, to provide you the support services needed. Sometimes perhaps it's easier to figure out ways that independently you can be productive rather than saying, you know, trying to get you back into the traditional workforce. And I think that's an area that's not adequately addressed yet. There are pervasive violations of disability rights going on, and they're just plain not reported about, and people just don't seem to be concerned about them at all either. You know, it's you know, I've had many myself, you know, but there's if you think about it, there's all kinds of instances across the country where children have been, you know, special needs children have been put into public schools, but then the children with autism will get arrested if they act out and bite a teacher or act up or whatever. I mean, the cops come into school and arrest them. Why are they being arrested? They're being arrested because of their disabilities. That's not right. And a lot of times, in some of those instances, for example, it's not the regular. The teachers don't always have a special needs assistant in the classroom for those children. In some cases, the special needs children are got bunched together and they're kind of in name included in the educational process, but not really. And for example, a substitute teacher comes along and an autistic child in the classroom likes to wear their hoodie up. That gives them the security that they can manage in the classroom, and the teacher comes along and pulls the hoodie down. The child bites the teacher for upsetting their security, and the child gets arrested. And you gotta laugh to keep from screaming. That is really criminalizing someone because of their disability, rather than providing them with the adequate support services they've needed. There are a lot of people with mental disabilities, who really are going off the wall, and police will show up and think they're a danger, and they'll wind up shooting them and killing them, rather than being well trained to know how to handle a situation, non-violently, of dealing with a person with mental disabilities or other types of cognitive disabilities. In Houston, back in September or so 2012, Houston Police Department was called to a group home because a double amputee in a wheelchair who was also schizophrenic, or had mental disabilities, was kind of acting wild and threatening. Everyone had left it. The few people who lived in the group home and the caregivers had gone outside. They had left the home. 2 Houston police officers go inside, and one of the officers claims that he felt that he and his partner were cornered and threatened by the person in a wheelchair, the disabled person, double amputee in a wheelchair, who was brandishing a ballpoint pen that they thought was a knife, and they shot him and killed him. Now, give me a break. Give me a break. Since when does an able-bodied police officer feel like they've really been cornered and threatened by a person in a wheelchair, that they got so badly that they got to shoot him and kill him? Give me a break. And the officer was no build. I mean, there weren't any. The grand jury didn't lay charges against him. That kind of thing has got to stop. And there was, but there's just all kinds of times when disability rights, accommodations, when really disability rights are just violated. I often say that at this point still, that anyone can be just about 95% guaranteed that if they violate someone's ADA rights, they're going to get away with it scot-free, because there are not adequate legal resources and not enough public awareness and public concern, media reporting about it, that it really has gotten the attention that it deserves. But it's pervasive. I grew up in the civil rights movement, starting in the mid-1950s, and I can tell you that I have not witnessed ignorance and prejudice as pervasive towards a class of people as I witnessed back in the 50s until I became disabled. And I really do feel that the ignorance and the prejudice is just as pervasive as the racial prejudice that I witnessed back in the 50s. It's not as murderous, but it can be really just as mean a lot of times. But it's not as it's not as blatant, it's not kind of out in the open. And like I said, there's no media reporting about it. There's just not the concern about the violations, and so it's that's a real problem. I mean, how can you have equality if your rights are being violated and they're not enforced? There aren't adequate legal means to have them protected and enforced. You know, that's why it's not going. Equality is not going to happen in my lifetime. And you know, another example of that are like in terms of financial institutions. Under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, banks and lending institutions and others are supposed to have special credit needs, special credit programs for those classes of people who do not fit normal banking criteria. So, for example, providing overdraft protection or free checking accounts or even small loans or that kind of thing. If you're a person with disabilities and you're impoverished, you don't have enough money to qualify for that, overdraft protection. You don't have enough money to put in the account to get the overdraft protection. And yet, say for example, with a cognitive disability, now I've asked banks, you know, listen, can you kind of waive these overdraft charges, because sometimes I forget, you know, that I haven't deposited a check or I've written a check, or it's difficult because of my brain damage to manage my bank account. So why should I? Can't you do something here? And the response that I've gotten from one bank was, we treat everyone the same. We don't discriminate against everyone. We treat everyone the same. But that in itself is a de facto admission that they're discriminating against people with disabilities, because if they treat me the same as a person with disabilities as everyone else and don't provide me with the accommodations under the law that I'm supposed to get as a person with disabilities, then they're discriminating against me. If you treat people with disabilities the same as everyone else and yet deny them the accommodations they need as a person with disabilities, then you're discriminating against them. And that's an example. I stood outside of that institution with a big protest sign one day that said, you know, so and so bank, you know, discriminates against the disabled, and their manager kind of pulled up alongside me in the sidewalk and kind of rolled down her window and kind of dropped her glasses down her nose and says, "Excuse me, but just what do you think you're doing?" And I said, "Oh, it's okay. I'm only exercising my First Amendment rights, you know." It's, you know, and she called the cops. And cops kind of knew me as a disability advocate, or knew that, you know, I kind of had a reputation in the police department. And I think they advised the bank manager not to be nice. And a little bit later, she came out and asked me if I needed any water or anything, you know. But it's, you know, that was something else.
And you were talking about the ignorance and the prejudice.
Yeah,
and that's even within family members. You know, it's not just between the public people. It's even within the families.
Family members and friends. I mean, one of the things that happens to people with disabilities is that really a lot of those relationships get lost or damaged, particularly with cognitive disabilities. I mean, it's just you find that a lot of those old friends just aren't friends anymore. You know? And they'll make up their stories or have their excuses or whatever, but it's a real lack of awareness. I mean, but and respect for and just really respect. And I mean, and in terms, I mean, here in Texas, we've got a really big example of how people really blatantly have disrespect for disability rights, and that's from our own governor, Greg Abbott, who is himself a person with disabilities, and yet he's gone to federal court any number of times arguing that Texas has sovereign immunity from abiding by the Americans with Disabilities Act. I mean, it doesn't get any more absurd, insane than having an attorney general and governor with disabilities trying to claim that his state does not have to abide by the Americans with Disabilities Act because it's got sovereign immunity. You know? That's crazy. That's crazy. But it's that, I mean, that's a good example about, I mean, I think I think that attitude from Greg Abbott is you find that in other places. Oftentimes I've found that if I ask an organization or a group or whatever for a disability accommodation, their response is, oh, the ADA doesn't apply to us. Well, it does.